Thank you very much. So, as discussed, Farmanco's looked at alternative sources, and so what happens in this is normally it's a bit like harvest or shearing, really. Someone wanders up your driveway and will present you an offer to become involved in a wind farm or alternative energy project. And at that stage, people go, "Well, what's this really mean?" And at the moment, it's really just trying to get groups of people together that might be interested. So it's a bit like harvest, and it's a bit like shearing, where people are busy collecting all the wool, sorting it out into 3 a.m. and or wheat, barley, canola, and then looking for a market. And the market or who you sell it to might not be the end user. So in all these situations, there's a lot of people out there looking um, for their project to get a foot in the door. So really at the moment, that's what we're looking at, and it's pretty widespread. The only thing with that is that people have been approached all over the place, but when you have a look at the grid, and I have to apologise, they've just updated where they're going to expand the grid to this week, and I haven't had time to go and hunt down a slide. But as you can see, across the state, unless you're close to one of the key areas where there's transmission lines, you people might still be out seeing you, but it's unlikely that a project's actually going to get up. And so what we're seeing is that people have been approached individually across the state looking for project opportunities. And that's fine that we're allowed to do that, but you want to be realistic and take a look and see where you are and see whether there's actually a real likelihood of this occurring. Because at the moment, what we think is that there's far more proponents trying to get a project up than there's actually projects available at the end. So that there will be people that miss out because the capacity will be fully supplied. There'll be people miss out because of their location. And so but on the flip side of that, there's opportunities. And the real opportunity, as was discussed earlier, is the remuneration. So at the moment, there's two broad things we found, and one is a profit share. So in essence, you get paid per megawatt of power generated, and this gives you a higher degree of risk or reward. And then the other side of that is there's a fixed turbine payment. So it's like a commercial lease. It has a term, generally 25 years is what we're seeing being proposed. But these are a long way out. And you go, well, why would you consider this? And the real answer is that it's a really good return for where you are. So what I've done to have a look at that, in the left-hand column, there is the annual profit that we're generating in each rainfall zone. So this is a 5-year average. And so in the low rainfall, you're $166 a hectare. The high rainfall, $391 a hectare. So it's a significant profit. Then we've said, and you can argue me up or down on this, but we assume that the land value grows at about 5%. Traditionally, farmland value has grown at about 5% per annum over the long term. It does do periods of stagnation and then increases, but over the long term, it's been increasing by 6 or 7%. So over 25 years, that equates to $472 a hectare a year in income. And for those who are still in my vintage and still talk acres, an acre figure is to the right. So if you combine that together, in the low rainfall, over a period of 25 years, you're sort of looking at an estimated return of $638 a hectare. And a wind farm will probably take up less than a hectare. But I thought the best way to look at this is to go, if you were to get $10,000 a tower, and that's no way near what is being offered, then in the low rainfall zone, you'd need to farm 16,000 16 hectares to make that $10,000. In the medium rainfall, it's 10 hectares to get the $10,000. In the high rainfall, it's 7 hectares. And the reality is that it's far higher than that. And it's probably more in the range of 30 hectares per tower. You'd have to farm 30 hectares to make the farmland value of what a wind farm generates. Probably around 40 in the low rainfall hectares you'd need to farm to generate the 10,000. So really, there's a really good cash incentive for these projects to, if you're approached, to consider them and take them up. So that was the surprising thing. I think the best take home from all this is that we're often feel like we are under pressure, because often when people come in for these, they come in, offer a confidentiality agreement or a non-compete clause, 12-month window to do testing. So essentially they'll come onto your farm, put a tower up, see how much wind's around to see whether there's a viable project. And then it's a 2 to 3 year project before they'll actually say, yep, there's a project going on, and then the building starts after that. So it's quite a long lead in time. There's trying to get exclusivity. And I think the best way to think of this is there's a wind farm just been completed in Williams, and Andrew Fowler was on that, and there's a interview with him, and he says, in the end, farmers are profitable. If we have a wind farm or don't have a wind farm, it doesn't change the fact that we'll be farming. And if you're not there, we'll continue to farm, we'll continue to be profitable, we'll continue to do what we do. Without the land that the farmers stand on, the wind farmer's got nothing. So it really does put the farmers in the box seat in this. And he goes on to say that it's a negotiation, so there will be back and forwards. But they've had 32 draft agreements done before they signed off on the final agreement to make sure that it matched their expectations and where they're at. So this is a group of farmers that got together to do this. And so it's not an easy course, but what it says is you don't have to accept the initial proposal. And what we are seeing more and more is that there's groups of farmers getting together where they're seeing that they can act as a collective. Like there's the Marchagee Wind Farm Group, there's this group in Williams, there's the Flat Rocks at Kojonup. So there's a raft of these where they're going into contracts with a greater sense of strength. So the pros, as was already outlined, is potential off-farm income that's not directly related to agriculture, and it's a good return. I think the real strength of this, if you're a small business and you're struggling with the current land values and succession planning, it's a really great way to provide an off-farm income stream for those that are not directly involved in the business. The other thing about that I should have mentioned in that slide about where the infrastructure is, wind farm proponents have a preference for access to the wind infrastructure, but also bitumen roads. So because they've got to move large pieces of equipment up and down the road. So if you're on a heavy equipment road next to that infrastructure, then you'll be a more favourable location than somewhere where they've got to drag through windy roads or gravel roads, which might not be suitable. So when in the context of that, make sure you keep a lookout about where you are. But also, wind farms are willing to work with farmers to put the infrastructure in that enables them to service their equipment, but also in the best spots for yourself. So if you need road access to the back paddock, it's a great opportunity to negotiate that if there's going to be a wind tower out in that place. We are seeing how when we talk to the Shire of Darkin, there's potentially a community fund for the wind farms that are going in there. So there's some opportunities for the local community. And with all investments, you can invest at a different level. You can be very passive and have a tower payment only. Or in one case, talking to a grower that's been in one of these projects, he actually invested further up the project. So not only is he getting paid for the tower, he's getting a return out of the project itself as a shareholder. So there's opportunities there when these have been established for you to be involved at different levels. The cons, like all these big things, there's the sovereign risk. And when we talk about sovereign risk, it just means that the government or the policy changes. So whether that's the local shires changing the agricultural rating zones to a commercial rating zone because they're seeing more income and want to clip that ticket, a change in government policy, and you could speculate that's unlikely to occur in the next round of elections. But if there's to be a major change in government policy, then some of these might not have the incentives to go ahead. The other part about this is there's definitely friction amongst neighbours, particularly if they don't like the aesthetics or they've missed out or in the opportunity. There is a little bit of resentment in that. And I think the risk that, to me, as a farmer, we're long-term people and sometimes multi-generational, and it's the end-of-life projects on these because you go, this is a 25-year lifespan and there's a big concrete block in the ground holding a tower up. The first of the wind farms in the eastern states are coming to an end of life and they're not going to be renewed. They don't have the footings to put a bigger tower or bigger motor up. So at the end of the life, the thought process at the moment is just get them to bury the concrete as deep as possible. So if it ends, it gets taken away, you can push the soil back over the top and go back to your life beforehand. For some people, it won't matter because some of these wind towers will be going on to less productive farmland anyway. But it is that end of life project, or if something was to go belly up and you're stuck with towers and no income and you've got these projects on your farm. I don't think that's insurmountable, and I don't think being farmers being long-term people, and if it's economic, they'll make things happen. If you look at the blue gums in the southwest, that's been turned back to farmland, and it's not something I would have thought could have occurred or has occurred as quickly as it did. So just I really want to go back and just say at the end that the wind farm proponents, the people coming out to see you and trying to get your signature, they need you more than you need them. As profitable farm businesses, we have the box seat in negotiations, and I'm looking forward to hearing the presentation later on around the legal aspects of this. And thank you for listening in.
Thank you, Greg. That's excellent. Like I said, please keep if you've got question and discussion points, write them down because we'll be coming back at the end, talk to Greg. We're now going to switch over to an extraction-based side of things in gas. So we've got Rebecca Kelly here, who hails from Mingenew in WA's Midwest, where she runs her family's broadacre cropping operation. They grow wheat, canola, lupins, and commercial pasture seed. Since 2018, Beck has been at the forefront of her family's engagement with gas companies. In 2024, she undertook a Nuffield Scholarship to gain a global perspective on how farmers navigate negotiations with energy companies. Rebecca has truly ridden the wave of land access negotiations and brings deep insight into the complexities and culture of the gas and extraction-based energy industry. She's a font of knowledge, and today she'll be sharing her experience and top tips with us. So I'll pass on to you, Beck.
Thanks, Eleni. I'm glad you wrote the bio, not me. I'll just share my screen. For those I haven't met, my name's Rebecca Kelly, and as Helene said, I'm a grain farmer in Mingenew, and I did a 2023 scholarship with Nuffield. I farm with my parents, Paul and Sue Kelly, and our farm is halfway between Mingenew and Dongra, just on the Midlands Road. So my Nuffield scholarship was to research the interaction between energy and agriculture, and I specifically explored what happens when a solar, wind, oil or gas company approaches you to produce energy off your farm. To give a little bit of a brief background about Nuffield, it's been going since about the 1950s, started in England, and it's spread to about 20 countries now. And so you were chosen to do a topic. Mine was the agriculture and energy topic. And you travel around the world looking at that topic, but your travel isn't solely related to that. So while I did look at wind farms in the Netherlands and oil and gas in America, I also looked at oyster farming in Ireland and bull breeding in Argentina. So it gives you a nice global perspective. I was lucky to travel to 12 countries. Not all of them were to do with wind, solar, oil and gas, but it did give me a good background. I specifically chose my research topic to be about the interaction between energy and ag because it was a topic personally affecting our farm. As Helene mentioned, nearly 8 years ago, a major diversified resource company approached us with a proposal to install gas rigs on our property. We were sitting across the table from a billion-dollar company or multi-billion-dollar company, and we're really uncertain about our rights as farmers, potential repercussions, the complexities involved, and also where to find the valuable information. As soon as the gas liaison left the kitchen table, we all started Googling and researching and realised not only was there a lack of information, but there was also the information that was there was skewed towards the gas companies. This led me to embark on the Nuffield, and it was not only to broaden my exposure to countries advanced in gas exploration, but also to explore energy sources such as wind and solar. So in my town alone in Mingenew, there's over 5 gas companies, and there's also a large group of wind companies as well. So it's a bit of a hotspot for activity. So this is just a photo of our farm. This was pre-gas, same as everyone else's farms, I guess. There's trees, there's crops. It's the landscape that's been there for generations. And it's also what we love about farming, the connection to the land, the open spaces, and the knowledge that every decision you make shapes the future. But then this is also my farm now. You can see the gas rig, the flaring, and the industrial footprint there. Whilst the gas side of things only takes up a very small percentage of our farm, there are still challenges with having to farm with a different set of next door neighbours. And it's a new set of rules that govern us as well. While it's a very different view, it also represents, just as Greg was saying, opportunity, negotiation, and learning how to protect our farm will be part of the energy transition. The contrast is exactly why it's so important to understand your rights and be prepared if a company ever comes knocking on your door. My experience made me realise that many farmers will face similar situations in the coming years. If it's not gas, it could be wind, solar, or it could be the transmission infrastructure. So understanding your rights and strategies is essential. So during my Nuffield, my goal was to identify best practice and take home strategies that could protect me and other Australian farmers. But one of my big key takeaways was that farmers all around the world are often not getting fair terms. So through my research, I discovered how individualised these negotiations are, not only internationally, but across Australian states. That's why practical strategies tailored to your farm and circumstances are crucial. While international examples and Nuffield research provide valuable lessons, the reality is that the energy development in Western Australia has its own unique challenges and opportunities. The types of projects you might face, the regulatory environment, and the state's energy priorities all shape what negotiations will look like on the ground. So understanding this local context is key before entering discussions. So to give you a bit of an overview on Australia's energy mix, it's changing rapidly. Nationally, fossil fuels still dominate. So coal is 45%, gas is about 17%, and oil is 2% of electricity generation. and renewables are about 36%. This is mainly solar and wind. By 2030, the goal is to reach 83% nationally. But in Western Australia, completely different landscape. Natural gas is central, providing over half the state's energy. Renewables, particularly wind and solar, are growing. But in 2021, they're about 2.3% of WA's energy mix. I think now they're up to around about a 3.4%. So it is drastic compared to the rest of Australia. The expansion of renewables is driven by technology, policy support, and the state's push to reduce fossil fuels reliance. So forecasts show electricity demand on our main grid, so it's the Southwest Interconnected System, can grow dramatically over the next 20 years, especially if the large projects like hydrogen, mining, and critical minerals increase. To meet with the low emissions electricity, WA needs more renewables, storage, and expanded transmission. One estimate is that we'll need 10 times the current generation capacity on the Southwest Interconnected System to serve high scenarios of demand with large renewable supply. Some of the Southwest Interconnected Systems suggest that over 80% of electricity consumed could come from renewables by 2030, and some models also say 96% by 2042. So wind energy is the major focus. At the moment, Greg might be able to correct me if I'm wrong here, but I think there's 33 wind farms across the state with more plans. One of the ones in planning is said to be the largest wind farm outside of China. So it's going to have about 400 turbines. It's 170 kilometres southeast of Perth, and that's starting in 2028, so very soon. But what does this mean for the farmers? All this growth in energy infrastructure isn't a headline. It's something that directly affects landowners. Simply put, more energy is needed to support our lifestyles, and more energy comes from more wind turbines or solar plants or gas fields. And the more projects on the run, the higher the chance you may be approached. These projects can impact farm operations, soil, water resources, and even local communities. Understanding the energy landscape, knowing your rights, and preparing for negotiation is essential. The decisions you make now can influence financial returns and the long-term sustainability of your farm. So I want to be upfront. Negotiations are complex. Every farm is different, and I'm just trying to help you be a little bit more prepared when these opportunities come to your farm. I'm learning as I go. There's been some things that I've done really, really well, and some things that didn't go as smoothly and were challenging. And I've prepared a few tips for you, and these are all from my experiences. So there's 3 slides like this, but I'll go through them. My first tip would be tracking your time. I know that sounds like the simplest tip, but it's something that none of us do when we start this process. Track all your meetings, calls, and emails, have a spreadsheet, and document it all the time. Negotiating isn't just farm work, it's a high impact investment in your property. From my own experience, the hours quickly add up, and being able to show how much time you've dedicated strengthens your position for fair compensation. Fair compensation is the next one. Always advocate for rates that truly reflect the value your farm brings to a project. This is exactly what Greg said before as well. In terms of wind farms, we don't need the wind farm, they actually need us as well. I also heard someone say that there are $40 an hour jobs and $400 an hour jobs, and farmers are experts at prioritising the $40 ones. So sitting at the table discussing pipeline routes might feel less urgent than spraying your fire breaks, but you can pay someone $40 to do that job. Meanwhile, the decisions you make in negotiations can create far greater long-term value for your farm. Your time at the negotiation table isn't just another farm task, it's an investment in your property's future, and your compensation should really reflect that. The long-term impacts of the farm. On-farm exploration can affect the long-term value of your property. You think beyond immediate disruption. Consider soil compaction, changes to drainage, access restrictions. It's also worth thinking about what future buyers might consider a negative impact. This is not just theoretical. Some sites we've had explored now require rehabilitation planning years down the line. CPI and financial adjustments. All monetary figures should be linked to CPI. This is something that they often don't put in their contracts. If you can, put CPI plus a margin. depending on your situation, well, $100 today, you're going to buy a lot more than $100 in 10 years' time, even with CPI. So just try and make sure that's in there. Tangibles and intangibles. This is how you set up looking at what your compensation looks like. Compensation isn't just about direct costs, though. Tangibles are the things that are really easy to write down. They're yield loss, road access, weed burdens, paddock remapping, compaction remediation, biosecurity, legal fees. They're quite easy to make a list about, but the intangibles should also go in there. So it is opportunity cost, mental load, sound and visual pollution. Make sure you document both and attach realistic values to all of them. Face-to-face engagement. This was a tip that came from someone very early on when we were having the negotiations, and try and meet with the highest possible level of decision makers rather than dealing with the junior staff if you can. And also being treated as a number or a location on a map weakens your leverage. If they understand your operations and you understand theirs, negotiations are smoother and you can advocate effectively for your farm. So we tried to get as many of these gas guys into our headers, into the cedar bars as we could. When they understand what is happening to us and what our issues are, they're more likely to take us seriously. Community and environment. Always think beyond your farm. The Mingini Shire and the Mingini Board is a great example of this. Many of the gas or renewable projects compensate the farmer, but the rest of the community still feels the impacts without getting compensated. Mingini have started a community benefit fund to try and encourage projects to put a percentage of the capital investment value directly towards the town, with a committee then advising council on how to use the funds best for the wider benefit. If you're negotiating on behalf of your farm, this framework can provide leverage to ensure the broader community benefits as well. Know your land titles. It's really important to get a copy of your title from Landgate so you understand exactly what your own depth of your property is. This was something that really surprised me. We went to Landgate, we got copies of our title, and some of our titles were called heaven to hell titles. So there was no depth limits on them. But then other parts of our farm had titles that had 60 metres or 800 metres. This affects what negotiations you can control, especially when energy or resources companies approach you. There's a lot of standard things, gold, silver, oil and gas, and a lot of the minerals are owned by the Crown, and companies can gain exploration rights even if you own the land surface. But if it's on top of the surface, so wind and solar, you have a lot more rights to negotiate for. Neighbourhood collaboration, strength in numbers. Collaborating with neighbours strengthens bargaining power, especially for pipelines and seismic groups. Forming a local group increases transparency, prevents companies from pitting neighbours against each other, and ensures more consistent terms across the region. This was a really big one for our farm as well. All of my neighbours got together and we made sure that someone wasn't offered a box of beer and someone else was offered a car or something like that. It was equal across the board. We were transparent. And it also I get along really well with my neighbours, but it definitely helped that we all knew that we're all in this together and it was transparent. Farm sustainability, always prioritise long-term health of your farm. Terms and conditions are often more important than immediate compensation. For example, a pipeline agreement that offered slightly more money but compromised rehab or water access would have been a poor trade-off in the long term. Lots of people get dazzled by shiny figures and numbers, but you need to think of your long-term health of your farm more than that. And then these are the last 5. Biosecurity is paramount. You should have your farm surveyed, your water baseline surveys, your environmental surveys, and keep all the reports. Ensure biosecurity measures, washdown pads, rehab responsibilities are clearly defined. These help prevent disputes and save significant time down the line. Material vigilance. I got told along the way that we don't know what tomorrow's asbestos will be, so treat materials prudently to safeguard your farm. Contractual clarity. Engage directly with the major company rather than subsidiaries when possible. Subsidiaries may lack financial stability, potentially compromising projects, delivery, or rehab responsibilities. So quite often with these companies, they have a sub-company that will do the work, and there's a fear that if they don't find what they want and rehab's going to cost a lot, that they might just fold. So make sure there are guarantees in place that you're not going to lose out in the long term. This hasn't been something that has affected us at the moment, but it is something that we think about with our contracts, and it's carbon credit considerations. Ensure contracts clearly define company obligations for carbon credits, so your farm isn't unfairly burdened with responsibilities that should rest with the energy company. I know this is a growing space. I don't have enough information on it, but it is something that we're considering. And then the last one, which leads on to the next speaker, is professional support. Secure the right legal team early. Ensure energy companies cover associated legal fees and involve your accountant early too. Contract wording can affect taxation. In my experience, having a trusted lawyer who understands energy agreements saves both time and money. So negotiating with energy companies is complex and ongoing. My hope today is that sharing my experience and also Greg and Michael's experiences, insights and lessons, that you will feel more informed and better equipped to protect your farm while exploring opportunities. Thank you to GGA for the invitation to speak and for supporting farmers through education and knowledge sharing. And thank you also to Nuffield, and CBH was my sponsor for my Nuffield as well.
Thank you very much, Beck, for sharing those insights. Some excellent. When Beck first spoke to Beck, she said, my top 4 tips would be this, and then you've come back and given us like 20. So thank you so much. That's even better. So as Beck said, our next presenter is Michael Swift, who is one of WA's leading agribusiness lawyers and a partner at HWL Ebsworth Lawyers here in Perth. His expertise spans agribusiness, real estate and infrastructure projects. His clients range from major public companies and sovereign funds to developers, government bodies, and judging by how often Michael's name comes up, an ever-growing number of farm businesses. Michael has extensive experience representing landholders in all types of land access negotiations, including renewables, gas, petroleum and mining. It's a complex and nuanced field, and I'm really pleased that we are able to have Michael here today to help us unpack the legal perspective of things. So without much further ado, Michael, I'll let you unmute and go for it.
Great. Well, thank you very much, and thank you for Rebecca and Greg on your talks as well. Now, what I'm going to be doing today is discussing the 3 avenues for operators, being under the gas, the mining, or the renewables, to access private land, and then I'll discuss a bit of the areas to consider when accessing the documentation. Now, I will be going through some of the legislation, so that is going to be very dry and boring. But if you do take away one thing from my discussion, and what Rebecca touched on her last point, is please ensure you get independent advice before you sign anything in relation to access to your land. I cannot say more, and if I could just stop there, I would. Because someone came to me probably last year or a bit over 18 months ago, and they said they've just received a notice from a mining company that they're going to commence mining operations shortly on their land. And this person was aghast. They didn't know that they could do that. I looked into it briefly for them, and unfortunately they could. Someone somewhere down their family track had signed something, much unbeknown to them, and probably the person who signed it, where they granted the mining rights to the top surface of the farm. Now, that was an unmitigated disaster, unfortunately. So it is very paramount that you don't sign anything. And as Beck said, people come to you and dangle shiny things in front of you, and it's not been unknown to say, well, here's $5,000 cash if you just sign this, and we can just come on and have a look at things. But it's not always going to be in the first page of the document to say something. It'll be buried somewhere else. So just be very careful. So the first thing area I'd like to talk about is mining tenements on private land. Now, mining activities are governed by the Mining Act, and a mining tenement in respect of the natural surface to within 30 metres will not be granted in respect of private land, which is bona fide and regularly used as a yard, stockyard, garden, orchard, vineyard, plant nursery or plantation. under cultivation, used for agricultural purposes, including cropping and pasturing, whether cleared or uncleared, or used for grazing in the ordinary course of management of the land, except with the prior written consent of the landowner. So this consent is your ultimate power of veto. So for mining, you do have the ability to say no, and that is paramount. But once you say yes, there's no turning back. So you've got to be very considerate as to why you're doing this and what you're going to get out of it. And as Becca has mentioned, it's the long-term nature or impact on your farming operations. And it's not only just for you, it's intergenerational. So where an owner does grant consent, or doesn't grant consent, I should say, the mining tenement can still be granted, but they don't get it over the top 30 metres. So they would have to then go under a neighbour's property to get to your to get to the ore body under your property, and the expense of that is highly make the project unviable. Now, in the event that the landowner does grant consent, the Mining Act states that the holder of the mining tenement cannot commence mining on the surface unless and until it is paid to the owner an amount of compensation required under the Act. Now, compensation must include compensation for being deprived of possession of the surface of the land, damage to the surface of the land or any improvements that may arise from the mining tenement, severance of the land for rights of way and consequential damages. So it is a fair gambit of compensation to be considered if we are to go down that path and grant consent. Now, one of the important aspects of the Act says that compensation is not payable in respect of the mineral. So many people believe that they're entitled to, get some of the money that's from what's coming out of the ground. Unfortunately, you're not. The legislation says you can't do that. That's why the minerals are owned by the state. The mining company has the right to take them out. The mining company will pay a royalty to the state. Now, the amount of compensation is to be agreed between the parties, being the landowner and the mining tenement holder. And if you don't reach agreement, it'll be determined by the Warden's Court, by either party going to the Warden's Court. Now, interestingly, if mining is on your land and there's an adjoining property, that adjoining property owner may also be entitled to compensation through depreciation in value of the mining operations of the mining tenement. So that's just something to consider. Now, the second area where someone can access your land is under the Petroleum Geothermal Energy Resources Act. So prior to accessing the private land, the operator must first obtain the consent in writing and negotiate a compensation package with the private landowner. They can't commence on the private land extracting any petroleum until the compensation has been paid. Now, the kicker here is, unlike the Mining Act, there is no power of veto under the petroleum legislation, which is, that's the one where, unfortunately, you can't stop them coming on. I don't know why the legislation has done that. It's probably because the footprint of the petroleum explorations in the wells is a lot less than a mining operating. So that's the reason potentially why they've allowed them that nuance there. So access can be denied in certain circumstances if the land is less than 2,000 square metres, used as a cemetery, or within 150 metres of a reservoir. So most of those, or an improvement. So most of those won't stop them coming onto your property. It just means that they won't be able to go within 150 metres of a watercourse or dam or bore or any improvements. Now, again, they can't commence operations until they've agreed compensation with the landowner and they've paid it. Now, compensation will be looked at for deprivation of the land, damage for the land, and or improvements. Now, again, the value of the petroleum under there belongs with the state. So now, if compensation can't be agreed, a little bit different from under the Mining Act, you'll be off to the Magistrates Court. So it's a little different, and there are different sort of nuances around those things. Now, the next one I'd like to talk about is access by renewables. Now, when I'm talking renewables, this is wind farms, battery storage, and solar. Now, as Greg mentioned before, there's no legislation that provides these operators ability to enter the land. The farmer is in the ultimate control. It has the power of veto like under the Mining Act. If you don't want to let them on, you don't let them on. If you do wish to let them on, then you need to negotiate the commercial terms for the transaction. and make sure that until you execute a binding agreement, you can pull out. Because sometimes you'll negotiate and you won't reach an end, and you want to be able to get out. So the normal process, as Greg alluded to before, is they'll probably come on, they'll knock on your door, you'll sign a non-disclosure agreement or confidentiality agreement. They'll try and lock you up in an exclusivity deal for a couple of years, because what they're trying to do is land bank. And there's quite a lot of speculative people coming out at the moment, especially with the battery operators. These people are like, they've got a $2 company. They're sort of wandering around everywhere. They've got no standing behind them. And what they're going to do is they're going to land bank and try and get sort of everyone signed up to something under an option, and then flick the option on to another operator who's got more money. So they're only in this to make a bit of money for themselves. They're the middle person. And then if you go down that path, it's very critical in relation to the documents, who you know you're getting into bed with down the track. So the normal process is, if after you've done a heads of agreement, a confidentiality agreement, you'll then do what's called a heads of agreement or commercial terms. Now, they're usually non-binding, and I'd suggest that they are non-binding, because then they will then flow into the option document, the lease, the easements, and the transmission line easements. And it's only when those documents are actually negotiated and executed is we'll have a binding agreement. And if you do it that way, the sword goes both ways, is that they can pull out or you can pull out. So, but it just gives you that flexibility. And remember, they need you more than, you need them to keep quoting Greg. So you are in the box seat. So they will need you more. So you're able to do those sort of things. So most of the time, the operators will have their standard documents as well. They've already prepared them, and they are so one-sided. I've recently done two big wind farms, starting one now, just completed one, and the starting position was absolutely ridiculous, with all the clauses being so one-sided. Even though they need you more, it's strange that they don't put up a realistic and equitable set of documents, but they're all one-sided, and maybe they hope that they can get some of this through. So it is critical that you look at those documents. So some of the areas I just like to go through in the documents, I won't go through them all, but just some of the main ones, is location. Now, infrastructure location is very important to the wind farms, being the locations of the tower, the transmission lines, and the access easements, as it can also seriously affect the farming operations. On one recently that I did at the beginning, they were just dotted everywhere. And this farmer was actually looking at, sort of semi-retiring, then leasing the farm to somebody else. And I said, well, where they've got everything, you're not going to be able to lease the farm to somebody else, because they're not going to be able to farm it. So it's very critical that you have sort of restricted areas on your farm that only the farmer can utilize, and then other little corridors where the turbines, where the infrastructure easements and things go. And quite often in these documents, they've been drafted to say that the operator or the wind farm operator can put their infrastructure wherever they like. And that's just I've just had one recently, and I just was chatting to the farmer, and they said, no, we're not having that. We'll have our restricted areas, and it's very critical that you have that map and know the areas that are paramount to you that you don't want anyone accessing or using. And then you can set that area aside that's designed as a restricted area, so they can't go there. Then they can have a sort of an uninterrupted use of the other areas, so to speak. And that's quite critical. I mean, the transmission lines and road access routes are generally wanting to be the least distance to the source, because that's going to be the least cost. So, but again, it shouldn't impact your areas. But as Greg mentioned, if you want a road to the back paddock, that's fine, that you can negotiate as part of the negotiation. But on one that I saw recently, they were just roads going everywhere and straight through the middle of paddocks. And I just said to them, no, look, that's just unacceptable. They use the existing roads, and or if they need somewhere, they just have to put a road where you need it to go. And if it's around the outside of the paddock along the fire break, so be it. And if it's a bit longer and a bit more costly, if they really want that wind farm, they'll happily snap that up. Other areas to note are the actual transmission lines and the height of them, because most transmission lines will be above ground, because that's cost effective. But obviously we've got to make sure that they're at a certain height that obviously aren't dangerous, but also that you can actually get your farming machinery under. and adequately get it under and increase in height over the time as machinery gets bigger. Because otherwise you're quarantining that land underneath the transmission line and you won't be able to use it. So it just becomes dead land. And they're not going to pay for that land. They're just paying for the actual transmission line. So it's critically important. Same with the cables. Some of the cables will have to be buried at some instances. So you've got to make sure that the right depth. So when you're doing your normal farming operations, ploughing, ripping, whatever it is, you're not going to strike those cables. And similarly, the quality of the cable have to meet certain AS standards. That's Australian standards. We don't want sort of cables from, I won't name any countries, but that it won't be up to quality and could cause environmental harm in the long term. Another area that in the documents that we need to look at is the operator normally will be financing these operations, and we'll have a financier to back them to go ahead. They will have a clause in there that says you will enter into tripartite deed with the financier. Now, tripartite deed just means a 3-person deed between the landowner, the operator, and the financier. And it's really just to govern when and if, and you hope not, that the operator breaches one of their covenants, and then the financier has to step in. So that's what the document governs. But again, most of them are one-sided and will say, you'll enter into the standard terms. And no, you won't. You will enter into on the terms acceptable to all parties. So these are it's just realigning some of these documents and most of the clauses. A lot of the clauses can remain, but it's just resetting the clock. They're not over here, they're not here, they're in the middle. A fair sort of equitable position on them. Another one is the indemnities. Now, most of the operators will provide you an indemnity, being the landowner, for any damage, death, or injury they cause. A lot of them will want a reciprocal one. You indemnify them for any death or injury you cause. That's a reasonable position. But what we need to exclude from the indemnities is consequential loss. So that's loss of profit, economic loss, things like that. So that's something that you need, because quite often these operators, the larger ones, they'll have large profit, and you don't want to be susceptible to those. Now, the last two I'd just like to talk about are probably two of the most critical ones, and quite often they're overlooked. One of them is assignment. And quite often in these documents, the operator will say, we can assign to a related body corporate without your consent. And by the way, you can't sell your property without entering into X, Y, and Z and jumping all these hoops. But what is critical is that if they get through that clause and there's an issue, they will just assign the document and all their obligations to you and their rights to a $2 company, and you'll have no recourse to them. And this is really critical at the end of the life of the equipment. So that's something that really needs to be considered thoroughly. The next one is security, and both Beck mentioned on it before. Quite often, when the first person is rocking up to your door, knocking on your door, they're coming out of the parent company car. They couldn't have enough parent company logos and all that sort of stuff all over them. That's who you think you're getting into business with, that parent company. And that first person who comes along is usually the hearts and mind person. So they've got the white teeth. They're the smiley person. They know everything about you. Okay. That's not the person who's going to end up doing the documents too, by the way. They'll roll some other sort of bulldog out for that. But what is also important is that, as Beck mentioned, is that you need to know who the entity is you're actually going to be dealing with. Because more often than not, that parent company will set up a special purpose vehicle, or an SPV, which is a company that's been purely set up to do the transaction. And this is a way of quarantining everything. And so that company doesn't have any assets in it. So if anything goes wrong, they're just going to go, well, pens down, you can sue us, we've got nothing in our name. So it's really important at that stage to know who you're actually going to be in business with. And it may be that you need to get a parent company guarantee or bank guarantee if they're going to put in an SPV. They'll fight that. Don't forget, you're in the box seat. The next one, and a really important one, is decommissioning. Now, these leases, I know Greg said they're usually 25. The last couple of ones I've been doing are 30 years with a 30-year option. So they're incredibly long leases. At the end of 30 years, or at definitely end of 60 years, the infrastructure on this property is at the end of its useful life. And it's going to cost a hell of a lot of money to decommission the site, especially if you've got all the towers and all the infrastructure on your property. Some properties just have limited towers and the property next door has a lot more on them. But irrespective, a lot of that is going to cost a lot of money. So what we need to see in these documents is a decommissioning amount, and it's not paid at the end, because if it's paid at the end, then they've got all their money out of the project and they'll just walk away. And especially if they can assign, they'll just do that at the end. So what we've built in, and in the last couple, and is that they have to put up a decommissioning amount in year 10. So if it's a 30-year lease, in year 10, they have to provide a decommissioning amount. Sits in trust and gets topped up over the years, so that the landowner knows at the end of the lease, there is a decommissioning amount there. So should they go bust, you've got that amount there. And that is very critical. Now, a lot of the projects and the renewable projects I've mentioned is a way of diversifying an income stream, and that's great. So when you've got the high rainfall, you're doing well, and you get that income stream, it's even a better year. When you're not doing that well, a low rainfall, and you get the income stream, it's really topping it up. So it is great. But with that, there's some significant risks there, and the documents have to be drafted correctly and negotiated. It's not just all about that upfront money, as Beck said, the bells and whistles at the front, because you're holding these farms as a long-term asset. So even if you want to sell it, you sell it with a wind farm. If someone's looking at it and go, well, that's great, but there's no security here, it's going to be a liability to sell. Similarly, if you're wanting to hand that on to your family, succession planning, you don't want to give them, a rotten egg. You want to make sure that they're protected as well. So it's really important that these documents are drafted very well, negotiated very well. So as I started, I'll end. Please get independent advice on before you give access and when you're negotiating the documents. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. Excellent. I just did not stop taking notes just then. Lots to go in the fact sheet. Thank you so much. I'm now going to open up for questions. I've got a few here myself, but I first want to ask for any from our participants. And if you do have the ability to put your video on while you're asking a question, that would be great. Obviously understand that that might not be possible for anyone, but just anyone can jump in if anyone has any questions or comments. I'm going to start then. Michael, you just talked at the end there about succession and on sale of land. In succession, often we talk about, selling off or providing titles to different siblings or different parties. What type of things do we need to look out for? How does that impact when you've got overarching agreement for a wind farm or with a mining company or with a gas company, and you then would like to, split a farm via titles or on-sell a portion of those titles?
Well, that's a good question, and quite often the proponents say that this is what they try to get in, is that you can't sell a portion of your property, whether it's to third parties or anyone else. It has to stay in one line. So those are clauses that need to be looked at very critically in the document. The one I've got recently at the moment, it says exactly just that, is that they cannot sell off parts of the property to third parties, even family members. It must all stay within the one person. But assuming that you can do that, obviously then with the succession planning, there'll be, if for instance, the wind farm is on, say, just for this discussion, half the farm. So it's on 5 titles and you've got the other 5 titles that haven't got it. Well, someone is going to be getting more of a kick, than the one child is going to get a better deal than the other child, assuming that the farming land is all the same yield and all the infrastructure is the same. They are the ones who then are going to get the income from the actual wind farm. How to deal with that? You could deal with that contractually, though. You could say, well, we split the farm, the wind farm's on here, you're getting $10 for our discussion a year from that. You have to give $5 to Bob or Jane.
Mm.
That's one way around it.
Mm.
Same with mining and the petroleum. Well, hopefully there's not too many people having mines on their properties, because that's sort of really going to take away the surface area. But on the petroleum ones, the same sort of thing. You would then have to sort of, the agreements go with the land, the mining agreements. So whoever gets that title is entitled to that income stream from the petroleum extraction agreement. So you would then have to have a contractual right between the siblings to split that, if that was the case.
Mm. Greg, have you did you pick up any of or discuss any of those sort of succession issues when in your studies or with the people that you spoke to through the Farmanco study?
Not specifically, but like all these, when the having where I see wind farms in particular, is that we're always looking for some way to equalise or make succession planning more fair, really. And you look at these and you go, if someone's put a wind farm on, it's required no real capital investment from the business, and it can generate a significant return off farm siblings. So these are new to us, and what I'd expect is over time that we see some sort of agreement come out of that from the landholder directing a portion of that income to off-farm siblings, would be my expectation over time, to ensure that it carries on, really. But to me, it's a great opportunity to do that. And for some smaller businesses, this could be I wasn't going to say life-saving, but could be a fundamental shift in their business, where if you're a small business struggling to expand or whatever, a wind farm may give you the capacity to grow your business quite significantly, where you didn't have the capacity before.
Excellent, thank you. Kelly, did you have any questions you want to ask before? Because otherwise I'm just going to fill up the time, because I've got lots written down here.
I'd just like to hear Mike's theory on the exclusivity agreements or the non-compete clauses at the start of these. As my view is, they're just a ability to, get your foot in the door, and we know that some of these proponents will not go on to develop the wind farm. They'll get it together and handball onto somebody else, who may amalgamate a group of these and then handball onto somebody else. So we're not necessarily dealing with the end person. I was just wondering what the view is on those.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think also Rebecca mentioned it previously about dealing with neighbours. So if you've got a confidentiality clause or non-disclosure agreement, NDA as they call them, you want to be able to carve out, you can chat to your neighbours, because obviously they don't want you all discussing it and just going, well, let's not agree to X dollars, let's all agree at this amount, or, so it's very important that you don't get quarantined from being able to talk to your neighbours. But also they are wanting to, lock land bank and try and lock you up, and then it's exclusivity agreement, or quite often they'll go, well, can we sign an option? Can you sign a 5-year option in which, and so then if you do, you can't do anything while they've got this 5-year option. And so that means that they can then go and hunt around. Can they get their neighbour on the same sort of 5-year option? Can they get this? Well, they've got it in this area. Then they'll do a few over here. And Greg, as you're right, then they package it up, and then they'll go to market with it, because they've got this land tenure right. So it's very important that you know who you're dealing with, and you can get a bit of a gauge pretty early on the way they start to negotiate and do things. And I had one particular person or entity who had coming to a farm, and they're a battery operator, and you could just tell after chatting with them, discussing with them how some of the negotiations went, that they had no intention of doing this project themselves. You know, they were just going to package it up and flick it on to whoever would pay them the most amount of money. And that's not the right thing for the farmers. You want to make sure that the person, you need to know who you want to be getting into business with there and being on your land and undertaking that. So it's really critical to know who you're doing business with. And that means doing some more checks, asking some more questions. And if the people aren't willing to give you that information, then that's a fairly good indication that I wouldn't be proceeding.
Greg, with our contracts, we actually put in, we could choose our advisors, and we left it quite open so that we could determine that our neighbours were our advisors as well. So that's how we looped around that. Michael, I've got a question about the good neighbour agreements. Have you come across any where there's been gas or turbines or something, and that the neighbours are offered a contract to be considered a good neighbour for it? They're paid for not arcing up about anything?
No, not too many of them, but it is. They are out there. They're you know, with the wind and the solar and the batteries. I mean, you can get, you don't want other people to be sort of raising issues with any of the development applications that are put in. So there are opportunities there for the operators to come knocking on neighbours' door as well. So, but it just really depends on the location and the nature of the neighbours and whether they're needed or not.
Just talking about timeframes. So, Beck, you've been involved since, was it 2018, or were there negotiations going on before then? And I think, Greg, in your presentation, you mentioned 32 drafts of a contract. So when you have someone come and knock on your door or call you up and say, oh, we're just doing this bit of exploration, or we'd like to put up, well, in our case, in wind, in the mine, the extraction-based resources, we'd just like to come and have a look, and, here's a land access to agreement for you to consider in exploration. What are the timeframes we're looking at, panel? And also, what are the different types of stages do you go through? Like, what do you agree to in exploration, for example, or in how does that tie you to processing? What do you need to be aware of? So I'll start with Beck.
Yeah, I can do this from our perspective. So we're approaching 2018. We were handed contracts in 2018 as well that we went through lawyers. But one of the pieces of advice we were given was to segment every part of your contract you could, so that there was nothing tying you in the long term. Michael, you can comment after this and say if it was the good advice at the very beginning. But we've had exploration contracts, and at the end of exploration, there was it didn't allow them to go to more commercialization contracts. It was just to explore on our farm if there was gas. And then if they found gas, they had to enter into new contracts altogether. And that way, if we did anything wrong in our initial contracts, we could ensure that for our commercialization contracts that we would make sure that everything we'd done it, dotted more I's and crossed more T's. So we've segmented everything, but the time frame for things, I think we were approaching 2018. It took quite a few years before, they actually left us alone for another maybe 12 months, 18 months before they started coming back. And then when they decided they wanted to put down rigs, everything happened very quickly. As Michael mentioned in his speech, you have no veto when it's petroleum. So when we'd signed contracts for one of our rigs, we've got 3 rigs. For one of our rigs, it was a matter of maybe 2 months between signing and them starting the earthwork process for us. Our whole process over that last 8 years, so they've sold companies. So we're dealing with it completely. We've gone through 3 companies now. We're onto the 3rd company that has bought out the previous contracts. And we are probably a couple of years away from commercialisation contracts again, I think.
Yeah, I mean, the timing is really dependent on the nature of the company and what's pushing the company. You don't know where they're up with other things. So unfortunately, and some of the players are small, some of the players are big. Sometimes the big players sit on something, the land bank stuff, and just go out there trying to get all the resources, locate them, bang, we've got them, and we just sit on them for a while. So it's really dependent on the market stage of the actual player who's actually got the assets there on what they're going to do. And yes, I've seen some that have moved very quickly. So it's really just, it's dependent upon the operational nature of the company. But they can slow it down and it can take a long time, but there's also, Greg said, even wind farms and everything, negotiating the documents can take an incredibly long time. The petroleum one's obviously a little different because they've got rights to push things along, and once they want to start operational extraction, if you don't agree with the compensation agreement within 3 months of them giving you that notice, you can go to the magistrate's court and they'll determine it. Yeah, it's just dependent on each one.
When you really,
but also, as Beck said, yes, putting it into the segments, so you can't stop them in the petroleum, but it's easier then to go, okay, well, let's just look at the initial stage first. That's one cost. We won't try and agree the compensation for extraction at this stage because it could take 5 years and a lot of things could change in 5 years and the compensation amount could have gone up. So let's have a new one when you want to start extraction.
That's really good advice, I think. I just like the wind farm stuff we see, they're often looking for that 12-month exclusivity, non-complete, and they're going to do a testing, and then it's quite a while. The mining one, there's like a lot of these, there's no guarantee that these projects will go ahead. And I just think of when I was farming in 1985 or 6 or something, someone came out and said they're going to go mining. They want to check for kaolin. 2 years later, they came back and drilled, and then nothing. And then about a decade later, someone else came back and picked up that project and said they're going to build a mine. Then they vanished. And so if there's not and I know that farm has not been, have no direct relationship with that farm, but I know that it hasn't been mined yet, and there's a small mine across the road. So you could go through this and get nothing other than, I think they paid us $180 a hole to drill holes. So at least they did after harvest. Some of these could be a long time frame and may never come to fruition because of downstream issues of freight or whatever, or the relative commodity price.
But you can put in sunset clauses in your contracts as well, where they expire after X amount of time and have to renegotiate again.
Yeah, I would have been a lot wiser, I think, if going back in time and doing those contract negotiations now.
So on that, I mean, particularly with mining, a lot of the time it does start as just being contacted, like Greg said, like even in 1985. Certainly my experience is you get someone calling you up and saying, oh, we just want to come and do some soil samples. No need for any, agreements or anything at this stage. When suits you, we'll work around your timetables and your harvesting and things like that. Michael, I guess, are we as farmers, if we are allowing soil sampling on our property, how is that committing to us to anything?
No, you're not, but you still wouldn't want anyone coming onto your property without having the right insurance or indemnity and stuff like that. So, and I don't want to be too legalistic about it, but look, you could let them on and just, that's fine. And so it's not going to, that doesn't mean anything. So, but if you want to then go, okay, well, you can only come on if you show us that you've got relevant insurance and you sign this document that indemnifies us for any damage that you cause to us, then that's okay. But soil testing, no, just because you do some soil testing doesn't mean that you've consented to the top 30 metres or anything like that.
Right.
And you can actually put that in the document as well. And that's what I always do. Make sure that if anyone coming on, they're saying this, your ability to do this, please, it's expressly stated that it is not being to be deemed or any granting of consent to the top 30 metres of the soil. Yeah.
Excellent. In terms of renewables, getting to the, so a couple of questions here. How far along are we, Greg, in terms of, you mentioned that capacity, and obviously we're going to have more than capacity. There's going to be obviously a time frame, and this, I think this is something you covered in your podcasts that you did with the Drought Hub. There's a time frame sort of where you estimate the capacity would have been reached. If people are going to get approached for wind farms, how much longer do you think there's going to be approaches made, or is that kind of, they're already tied up?
Good question, and it was answered by somebody else on the podcast that I was involved with, to be honest, and I can't remember his time frame. My feel is some of this may already be, or opportunities might be drifting. I just think of a client I've got up north that was approached 12 months ago by somebody, and they've been very keen to see them, and now it's next week, and they haven't seen them for several months. So I think at this stage, and my guess is that it will depend so much on how well that proposed southwest wind farm project goes ahead and how much of that they can get up and running, because that will be a significant portion of the state's energy commitment coming out of that area. And I think that's where the easy distribution into the metropolitan area, and that is compared to others. So I would think that there'll be a fading of interest in more remote areas, and those where there's the capacity hasn't been announced for upgrades and stuff. And as I said, that was on the radio this week. They've said they've just announced where those upgrades are going to occur, and I haven't looked. But my guess is we've probably got about 5 years, I'd reckon, on the initial sign-ups, and then it'll go quiet, and there'll be limited opportunity from there on in, I would have thought.
Thanks very much. And I suppose looking, like, wind is one option, and obviously the major option. Just wondering what other renewable sources should we keep a look at, which might also impact freehold farming land in the agricultural area?
Yeah.
Michael mentioned batteries. Is there other, obviously there's things that's thrown around like geothermal, those type of things. Big solar farms like they have in Europe.
Really, like, because we've got Meriden's a really good example. It's got both the wind and solar, and the reason wind's attractive to the farm consultant is it stands on less area, and so it complements what's going on. With a solar farm, we're taking up more land to do it, and there's some research that said that you need a viable, profitable livestock enterprise, because there is some research that says that grasses and legumes grow better under some of the shading conditions of the solar farm. So you could actually improve your productivity from your livestock and gain income from solar. No experience on the others, I've got to admit.
Michael, do you have a comment there in terms of what's coming, you're seeing across your desk?
No, it's predominantly wind. I haven't, as Greg mentioned, the solar does take a larger footprint, so it's not as necessarily as attractive to certain farming operations, but definitely the wind is the majority of the ones I've been seeing. I've only done one solar, but that wasn't on viable farmland, so it is really they're focusing on wind at the moment.
Excellent. And I'm just going to go back to Kelly. Kelly, I'll just throw back to you to explain the survey that you did to get some of the insights that Greg's been talking about today as well. So you just had some comments there around where farmers were at
Yeah, so as part of the project, we conducted a survey across 40 growers in WA to really understand their interest or experience in renewable energies. And the survey kind of asked two main things. So, what their experience has been, why they chose to get involved or why they chose not to get involved. And for those that had infrastructure on farm already, asked about what's their experience and do they feel like they've been fairly compensated and how it's impacted their day-to-day operations. So yeah, it was a really interesting survey, got some fantastic insights, but essentially probably one thing from both those groups of those that opted not to and those that opted have is that they really just wanted to understand or get more information about making an informed decision. And those confidentiality agreements really limited, I think, those in the early days of seeking information and talking to growers, to other, their neighbours or other growers that have the infrastructure on farm to gain their experience. We did come across a group that sort of worked together. So they negotiated as a group, which was a real, like a collective approach, which was a really great strategy and could share that sort of decision making experience. But yeah, when we were talking to the growers, they really wanted to understand, what have other growers been saying, like that limiting the ability for growers to talk to each other. Yeah, it's double-edged sword, I suppose, but from the grower's point of view, I think it has limited informed decision making.
Beck, on that, so thanks, Kelly. Yeah, on that, in terms of, you said you had your neighbours as trusted advisors. Things like liaising, have you managed liaising with local government and other stakeholders that are obviously impacted and but are not necessarily neighbours?
I don't think this is an area that we hit the mark on very well at the very beginning. We didn't involve our local shire. We didn't know that we could benefit the local shire as well by having these discussions. So it's something that going forward we're going to be a lot more aware of and have conversations with other stakeholders apart from the ones that are directly impacted. But it's not something that we did quite well at the beginning, Helene.
I think also that sometimes you assume people like local governments are aware or more informed than they might necessarily be. But I know particularly in the renewables space, it's not like an exploration permit or the phases of exploration. You really don't know a lot as a local government. Your local government may not have much idea at all about what negotiations are going on at all in their area, unless there's something that impacts roads or local government land. Was that your experience, Michael?
Well, yes. I mean, some of them will need to get a development application through for these projects, so the local governments will have an understanding of that. But that's only once they've got all the land ready to go ahead. So I think it comes back down to, and everyone's mentioned it a few times, the confidentiality or non-disclosure agreement. Quite often people think, oh yeah, I'll just sign that because that's nothing too bad. But it has such a significant ramification for going forward. And as everyone's mentioned, your neighbours, who you can get into. So it comes back to what I've sort of said, don't sign anything until someone's had a look at it. Because that, for them then coming on, then you can't even, potentially go to the shire, can't go to your neighbour. If it's been really bad in draft, you can't go to anybody. So it's really important. That you give yourself the most flexibility. So, but the shires will know about the projects once they want to get a go ahead, because they're going to get a development application in. But as Beck mentioned, it would be good to get them in early sometimes, because it's all about knowledge, and knowledge is gold, information is gold. So everybody is in this community, and will be affected by it, whether it's your neighbour or the shire or three neighbours down the road. So it's really important to have a consultation and community approach to it.
I'm just going to go to our participants that are online with us today. I just wanted to check in, see if anyone has any questions that have come up for them. Okay, I'm just going to go to one. I've got two more. And one is going back to sort of the nitty-gritty of farming and farming systems. And I think it was Michael, you mentioned the quarantining underneath things like power lines, and I'm assuming there's some quarantining that comes with any kind of infrastructure that's on farm. In terms of the future of farming, and we're constantly told that how we farm now is not how we're going to be farming in 10, 20 years' time. And these are very long lifespan projects. So in terms of specifically things like aerial, what goes on in the air, so use of drones or aerial applications, what do we know much there? Like, can you tell us about quarantining, or what kind of areas are we looking at? And also in terms of like building new infrastructure for our farm, are there impacts for us that we need to consider?
Yeah, well, thanks, Helen. Well, what I mean by quarantining is that if you can't get your machinery underneath the transmission line, then that area where you can't get under is basically going to be no use to you. So we had a proponent and said they weren't going to put it any, at a certain height, and we just said, well, if you are going to do that, then you need to pay for that land as a lease, because we can't use it, and we can't use it because of you. So you need to pay, you either need to stump up some rent for it, or you need to jack everything up at appropriate height that we can actually get our current machinery under, and even a bit higher, because we're assuming that some of the machinery may sort of grow in time. So, but another area you mentioned, and I didn't talk about it, is under these wind farms is quite often they'll have various clauses in there that says there are restrictions on what you can actually build on the farm, and a diameter, a radius from the actual turbines. It's all about to deal with wind flow and anything that can affect the wind flow. So you can't build structures, you can't plant trees to certain heights, and normally the starting position is you can't do it on the whole farm, because of these one-sided documents, and you just sort of say, well, look, guys, girls, you're just being ridiculous. We'll need to have some better parameters in there. And so on one of the ones we sort of said, well, it obviously excludes all existing infrastructure and everything on there at the moment. But if we need to replace something, then we need to have some better parameters, better buffer zones where we can do it. So they'll then built in some buffer zones, and they reduce some of the radius from where you could build. But there's only so much future proofing you can do, because you can't necessarily foresee 30 years, 60 years down the track what you can do, but you can try and from the current day and build certain sort of things in, but there's only so much you can do.
I have a quick question, Michael. It's about with all of this energy infrastructure coming about, there's going to have to be transmission lines and things like that. Is there anything you can suggest to us going forward in the future for those?
Well, again, the transmission line depends who's putting them in, because if it's Western Power or Synergy, they've got their own legislation in which they can come on and do things. So that's a whole nother a ball game. It's a bit like the telcos with their towers as well. So, but again, if they are purely private, or part of the wind farm and their transmission lines, again, as I said, wherever they go underground, we've got to make sure that they're built to a certain standard. So then over 30, 60, years, some of them have said, well, we can leave those transmission lines in the ground. And one of the operators, one of the farmers, corporate farmer was okay with that. But they had to be at a certain depth. And they had to be at a certain AS standard, so then they weren't going to be degrading. So, but it's a bit hard sometimes to work out everything. But otherwise, because if you look at a document and you try and future-proof everything, the actual project won't go ahead. And that goes to both sides. You have to have a bit of give and take. Otherwise, it's like if you have a litigator looking at your document and saying, well, you can't do this, this, and this, the project just won't go ahead. And that's not disparaging to litigators, but there has to be a fair bit of equity either side to make it sensible, because the operator's not going to come on if the farmer's going, well, you've got to pay me, $1 million a square metre for that. It's got to be profitable for them, and by the same time, it's also got to work out for the farmer as well. So there's got to be a bit of give and take.
Excellent. Well, thank you. We just ticked over an hour and a half. So I know we've taken up a part of your day for everyone, and I really appreciate it. I just wanted to quickly check in with Greg and Rebecca, Michael and Kelly to see if there was any final comments or questions from other panel members.
No, nothing from me, but thank you all for the opportunity. Thank you, Greg. Thank you, Beck, Melanie, everybody. Wish everyone the best for the season. And I'm just going to reiterate again, don't sign anything.
Thank you, Greg.
Really enjoyed the insights, Mike. That don't sign anything. That's been my advice to everybody: is don't sign anything. Go seek legal advice.
Yep.
And the take home, I think, from my perspective, is particularly with the wind farm stuff it currently is, that remember that they need you more than you need them. We're profitable farming businesses in WA. We can go about our business and not have a wind farm. We're happy to do that. This is an opportunity for both to benefit. And thank you, Rebecca, for your insight, because there's some really good tips on there that I think are really useful and I might steal.
Any final words, Beck?
I found the whole thing really interesting. Yeah, thank you very much, Michael and Greg and Helene and GGF for organising.
Thank you to our presenters today. It's been fantastic, and thank you also to the Farm Elevate program for making this possible. Yeah, there's not many opportunities where we have to be able to get the breadth and depth of experience that are on our panel today. So I really appreciate the time that our panel members have made. And also thank you to our participants for coming in today and listening. On that, we do have a for our participants, before you leave, we do have a slide we're just about to, oh, excellent.